Baby boomers.
I used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacy and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program.
They're out there on their own trying to figure it out. That's where the council really bridges that gap to make sure that that teacher is prepared to walk into that classroom for whatever is happening and prepared to help those kids learn.
Economics and personal finance can feel very daunting, and especially personal finance. It's changing so rapidly. How we operated our finances just 5 years ago, 10 years ago is very different. And that can be very intimidating when you're trying to teach that or you're struggling with it yourself. Programs that start at earlier grades, and we've talked a lot about high school and older grades, but we really believe that it's all the way through. And if we're talking about it all at every moment, that's what's really important.
And again, a lot of that is all based on good decision making. What choices can you make to get to where you want to be? You set your own goals. We're not setting goals for you. You set your goals and how your finances can help you reach your goals, your personal goals.
And now, here are James and Emily.
Well, good morning, all my podcast listeners. Normally, I would say good morning, Emily, but Emily is not able to be with us today, so it is just me going solo. However, I have a couple of great guests today. For those of you who do not know, April is Financial Literacy Month, and I have a couple of guests who are going to be talking about efforts to improve financial literacy in Oklahoma and some of the challenges and rewards of doing that. So let me get right to it. I'm going to introduce our guests. We have Amy Lee and Lynn Sasser in the house with us. Amy Lee is a recognized leader in personal finance and economic education, both nationally and across the state of Oklahoma. Since 2012, she has served as the executive director of the Oklahoma Council on Economic Education, where she leads efforts to ensure all Oklahoma students are equipped with essential financial literacy and economic knowledge. In addition to her work for the OCEE, Amy also serves on the Economic Education Advisory Council for the Oklahoma City branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, and she's a past president of the National Association of Economic Educators and the Oklahoma Jumpstart Coalition. Dr. Lynn Sasser is a professor emeritus of economics at the University of Central Oklahoma and also a past director of the UCO Center for Economic Education and past executive director of the Oklahoma Council on Economic Education. She served as the first president of the Jumpstart Coalition for Personal Financial Literacy and is a past president of the National Association of Economic Educators. Dr. Sasser is also an award-winning author of several economics and personal finance educational materials and has published research in a variety of economic and personal finance publications. And as I always like to say to people when I'm introducing Dr. Sasser, one of the persons I feel is kind of one of my academic mentors, certainly as I have been being a professor, and she opened up a whole world of economics to me and the opportunity to teach in that field. And so I am thrilled to have her and Amy both, who I've had the fortune of working with in the past as well. So the name of our program is Not My Generation, so we always start with a few icebreaker questions. And the first one is, what's your generation? Millennial, Gen X, Boomer, Gen Z?
Well, I'm baby boomer right there in the middle of it. I'm the one that had that big curve of people.
Yeah.
And I'm right in the middle of Gen X and Gen Z. So
right.
So I kind of identify a little bit with both.
I got you. I'm gonna claim you as Gen X. I don't. Okay. I always get on to Emily. I don't feel like I have enough Gen X guests on the show. So Emily is definitely a millennial, and we get a lot of those folks on the program. But they're all older than I think they should be. You know, it's like, that doesn't seem right.
Well, baby boomers are just old, so.
Okay, so what's one thing you are currently reading, watching, or listening to?
Well, the book I'm into right now is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Yes, I love it. I feel like if you're a parent involved in education of any level, I feel it's such a good book. So I highly recommend that book.
And it is having quite an influence on in the United States and state legislatures and school districts trying to alter their cell phone policies for students as a result of some of the work that Haidt and some others have done in that area. So yeah. It's on my reading list. I have not got it yet, but it is on my reading list.
You'll love it. Solid research to back it up too, which I love.
Well, I'm into more things that are a little bit more on the recreational side, being retired and finally kind of finding my role as a retiree. So I kind of have a variety of things that I just kind of pick and choose whatever seems interesting at the moment.
Okay.
And yeah. I'm also very interested in thinking in current events. And so I do try to keep up with a lot of current events.
That will set your hair on fire.
Yeah, it's
if you're not
part of the
careful,
reason
right?
that I'm gray.
All right. Well, what is your favorite or most used social media platform?
Well, considering podcasts as a form of social media, I love podcasts. I love crime podcasts. I love using that as my news source. So constantly just what's new, all leadership podcasts, all that. But crime is definitely my go-to.
Okay. All right. Very good.
I guess that mine is more Facebook. Primarily because through economic education, I have friends all around the world, and that's one way to kind of stay connected and keep up with what they're doing. I dismiss about 75% of what I read on Facebook, but I'm on it truly for the social side of it, and just to kind of keep up with friends and family.
Very good. I still use Facebook a lot. I get teased by my students and that I don't know the latest social media, whatever they're using, right? And Emily gets on it. She's much more up on social media than I am, but I still Facebook, X, LinkedIn. Those are kind of my three go-to.
Well, it's fun to keep up too with former students and see what they're doing, and a lot of them we're connected through Facebook. I do get on LinkedIn as well, LinkedIn because. Again, that's where a lot of my former students are.
Right. All right. Well, what's your favorite pastime or hobby?
I love visiting a good museum, especially one that's maybe not as well known, and just kind of checking out what their unique gem is that they have at their museum. So I love it. Love a good museum.
What's the most recent one that you've been able to visit?
Oh, just last weekend, I would love to do a shout out for this one, the Chisholm Museum in Kingfisher. They're doing in the process of doing some renovations, or will be starting that soon. But they have so many great things. It's a good museum to go visit. So,
Excellent.
Well, I'm very involved in the retired faculty group at UCO, and we go and just explore a lot of things about the greater Oklahoma City area. And I'm just really enjoying learning more and more about what all this state has to offer, what Oklahoma City has to offer, but certainly what the state has to offer. And we do go to a lot of museums, and we have a lot of guest speakers that are really highlighting a lot of the great things that are happening in this state.
Okay. Excellent.
So I guess, just focusing on Oklahoma and kind of the immediate environment has become just a real pleasure.
Very good. What's one event in your lifetime? I'm going to change this question up just a little bit from how we normally ask it, but in your lifetime that's had the most impact on either your personal, political, or economic or financial management views? You can pick whichever one you want to do.
Well, I'm going to go with political, but it leads into others. And I'm very thankful for my parents. When I grew up, I really never knew what political side they were on. We would discuss it a lot, but I didn't know who they were voting for. It was open conversation, being able to ask questions and to figure things out, which was maybe why I feel so comfortable in the economic space with economists. Well, on the other hand, or it depends. So I'm thankful that I had parents that I didn't really know, so I felt like I could make my own decisions and ask the right questions. So
there's a lot of freedom in that to kind of be able to put pieces together in some ways, right? And say, well, this is a good point over here, and this is a good point over there, and how do those fit together?
absolutely,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I also grew up in a family that discussed a lot of current events and was politically active. Growing up in Lawton, and again, it goes back to what all was going in the state, and I guess I've kind of carried that on. But to really go back to something that was very impactful for me was when I went back to UCO to work on a master's, and I had a group of women that just embraced me and encouraged me and really introduced me to the world of consumer education. And that started expanding the whole concept of getting into economics and personal finance. And so if I go back and I can point a finger at anything that was really life-changing for me, it was that group of women that, like I say, they really took me under their wing.
Excellent. Well, as I mentioned earlier, April is Financial Literacy Month, and you two have both been very involved, both in the state and out of the state, on that issue. So I want you to describe just how you developed an interest in economics and personal finance, what got you started in this, and what's kept you motivated to still be active and engaged in that.
Well, I think going back to what I just said about working on my master's and discovering the whole concept, the whole field of consumer education. I mean, my goal was always to be a journalist. And so I grew up with that curiosity of why things happen and how they happen. And so I think that really started me more on that area of why do we do the things that we do? Why do we make the decisions that we make? And because to me, economics and personal finance are behavioral sciences. I mean, we can put all the numbers to it and do all the calculations, but it still comes down to human behavior. And I think that's what I love about it, and that's how I tried to teach it. And I think that's one of the things that the Council for Economic Education has always done a great job of doing, is focusing these discussions on decision making. Because if we make good decisions, that impacts everything. If we make bad decisions, that impacts everything. So I think it's that whole idea of behavior and consumer behavior and how our decisions impact us, but it also impacts the world around us.
And I think for me with personal finance, we see, wake up in the morning and there's all these news stories about what's going on in our world. And I feel like there's so many of them that can be solved if we have greater personal finance and economic education. If we're prepared for that, it solves a lot of problems. Our economy just continues community strength, all of that. And so I think that's what drives me to be, I'm so passionate about it. And we also know it works. I think that's another big part about it too. It's not just a good idea. We know good financial education works, and we can see not only learning outcomes, but actual behavior outcomes. And that's what makes me passionate about it and why I've stayed so invested in it. And I'm loving a part of it.
Excellent. Can you, Amy, go ahead and can you kind of explain the mission and describe some of the work that the council has engaged in on economic and financial literacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So at the council, we're focused on personal finance and economic education in the state of Oklahoma and promoting that. And we're primarily focused at the K through 12 level. Okay. And we do that mostly by serving teachers at the K through 12 space. We really believe in the model of train one, teach thousands, and helping them feel empowered. And they're two really tough subjects. Economics and personal finance can feel very daunting, and especially personal finance. It's changing so rapidly. How we operated our finances just 5 years ago, 10 years ago is very different. And that can be very intimidating when you're trying to teach that or you're struggling with it yourself. And so that's what we really focus on as a teacher and professional development. We do have some direct student programs, but really the purpose of those is to help provide a program for teachers to get their students excited and motivated to learn about personal finance and economics.
Excellent. Now, does Oklahoma have any specific education standards for economics or personal finance? And if they do, what are those?
Well, historically in Oklahoma, those were embedded in the social studies. Now, there was a point in time, if you go back about 40 years, we did require an economics course, but it got pushed out with kind of that 4x4 and the college prep. And so economics then was worked as I was I happened to be in the state about the time that was happening. And so we were very fortunate to be able to move a lot of those standards into, especially the economic standards, incorporate those into history and government and other areas. There still are a separate set of standards for economics, but that's only for schools that have the option or choose the option of teaching an economics course. So it's more or less a voluntary course for schools to teach. Personal finance, however, does have its own set of standards, and we passed that legislation back in 2008. Mm-hmm. Oh man, boy, that and it was to be fully mandated by 2014. Am I right? Yeah, because I'm thinking there's 14 standards, and it was 2014, and so I was a part of that early process and developing the initial standards. But Amy can talk a little bit more about what the current status is of those standards.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we have a great set of standards in Oklahoma. I argue all the time that we have the strongest set of standards in our state than any other state in the country, and that's a pretty big thing to say, but it's really true. We have 14 standards that are very solid and very unique to our state as well. We can talk more about that in a little bit, but they cover their full coverage and what students need to know and understand. However, we have strong standards, but our implementation is where we're really lacking. And so that's where the gap is, and trying to make that happen. When it comes to economic standards, I think this is really important. We're one of 5 states that does not require economic standards to be implemented. So if you think about that and how that sets our students apart in our state, that's pretty big. One of 5 states that does not require them to be implemented. So that's a pretty big deal. We do require our standards in personal finance to be implemented, but it is not. It is left up to the district how it's executed. So some districts are doing that beautifully, where they have a full semester course, sometimes even a full year program. Other districts, they are embedding it into a course, which can sometimes be okay, but usually that course, I'll use an example of government, it already has a limited amount of time. Right. So then you're squeezing that in, or even worse, where it's just, hey, click through these slides and now you can go to prom or something like that. And so that really shows the difference and really access to personal finance education. So it's so that's where advocacy within our communities can really make a difference.
So, can you mention what some of those personal finance standards are? I don't know if you want to go through all 14, but you might pick out some that you find most relevant or such?
Yes, they're basic from earning an income, taxes, banking and financial services, retirement, insurance. One thing that is very unique to our state is gambling. We are the only state in the country to have gambling as a standard. It is very interesting. I'm very proud of our state for doing that, especially with our community, and that we have lots of access to that. And of course, we're not teaching students how to play blackjack or anything like that, but we're teaching about risk versus reward. Sure. And then if they choose to do that, how that goes into their entertainment budget, just as though you would go out to the movies or whatever and spend money on that, and that's in your budget. But I think that's even more relevant today, because access to gambling for young people, everybody really, is so high. When we're looking at sports betting and gambling, it's right in their palm. And we're hearing stories from teachers where students are actually gambling in class, it's so easy to do it. And so that's very scary. So I'm so glad that our state has that standard and we can address that in a real way. So those are a few of the standards that we have.
And again, a lot of that is all based on good decision making. What choices can you make to get to where you want to be? You set your own goals. We're not setting goals for you. You set your goals, and how your finances can help you reach your goals, your personal goals. And so the entire curriculum, the entire standards are all based around that, which I think is just so critically important.
So it sounds like on the financial literacy side, we've got really good standards. You mentioned implementation. We'll come back to that probably a little bit later. Implementation could be improved. On the economic side, it sounds like we don't have mandatory.
We don't have any mandatory.
If we could strengthen those, do you have any recommendations or suggestions? What could we do to improve setting some economic standards for our students?
Well, the National Council on Economic Education has a very comprehensive set of standards for economics. And so to just take those and adopt those or adjust those and bring those to Oklahoma would be very easy to do.
Okay.
It's convincing the people at 23rd and Lincoln, or even going beyond that, convincing people at the State Department of Education and the different superintendents across the state that that's really a priority.
Sure.
And that's always challenging because there's so many needs that are out there and there's only so many hours in a day.
So it sounds like in the creation of these standards that the council does have kind of a seat at the table. Can you describe the process of creating the standards and then updating them or whatnot, and what role the council or people affiliated with the council have in helping set those?
Mm-hmm. So all of our standards in the state of Oklahoma, all of our education standards go through a review process, and there's a set process for that. So in personal finance is on its own set calendar. So they were just reviewed about 2 years ago. So they'll be up for review again in about 2 or 3 years. And that's a great time to make sure that what we're teaching is still relevant. Things, as I mentioned, have changed a lot. And so to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. And so having that opportunity, but going through that process. But it's also a very popular topic at the Capitol. We have lots of legislators that are wanting to help in that, to help with the loan crisis and just debt and all those things going on. And so it's often something that's been brought up to in review. Representative Lowe has been a champion in personal finance education, has brought forth several pieces of legislation. And so that's been very helpful, but we still have a ways to go. But we are a very pivotal part of offering that expertise in what's going on. We actively follow and have great relationships with other states and what they're doing, because that's really important that we stay connected and also can see the changes, the actual behavior changes when there is good implementation and when we can see changes in credit scores, those types of things. So we look at those things, we help bring that to the table and provide advice on what legislation should look like. And we do have a good relationship with the State Department of Education in helping to provide resources. There's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, there's so much need out there, and to be updating and helping our teachers do that. So.
And I can say something that Amy can't because I'm retired. Traditionally, the process of approving standards, updating standards, approving standards is not the political side that we're currently seeing.
Okay.
Traditionally, it has involved educators, and it has involved people that have a lot of knowledge from the different subject areas to come together. And I'm thinking primarily of the social studies standards. And that wasn't exactly how this round worked, but this round is very atypical of what traditionally happens.
I sometimes think it'd be helpful for legislators, especially like new legislators, to have an economics primer, kind of a 1 day or 2 day seminar that just runs them through some things.
I've always said I wanted to give just a basic economics test to Congress because I think they would fail.
You're probably correct.
I think my freshmen would probably outscore, and whether it's Congress or 23rd and Lincoln.
Well, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have seen in improving financial literacy in Oklahoma? So what we've got these good standards, and again, I'm going to come back because talking about those has prompted something in me that is like that I see a disconnect. But before we get to that, just what are some of the challenges that you have seen in really improving people's understanding of how personal finances work, how to create a budget, as you mentioned, to manage their money well?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit to how we got this passed, and we were one of the first states to step up with personal finance standards. And And I still stand by that we are the most rigorous. And we've been told that by other states. They wish they had our standards. And my response to them is, I wish we had your implementation. So if we could marry some of this, it would be perfect. But in order to get a lot of things passed through the legislature, you have to have a lot of compromise. Right. And again, we recognize that there's only so many hours in a day and the needs are so great in our public schools for teachers to teach so many different things. And so when this was first passed, it was grades 7 through 12. Okay. And as long as it was taught in those grades, then it was okay. And I would have teachers from 7th and 8th grade math that would come to a workshop, and I would think, how do you teach retirement planning to 7th graders? How do you even teach about getting a job to 7th and 8th graders? And so, while it's great to have the flexibility, it also seriously impacts the way that it's taught and the value of what is being taught. Sure. Because kids aren't going to remember. Because they have no way to connect.
It would almost seem like you would have to have, if you're teaching it at that lower level grade, stuff that's a little bit more relevant to what they're experiencing at that point in time, right? You get an allowance of $10 a week or $20 a week. What do you do with that?
And that's basically what you do, but that still isn't exactly what the standards are, and so you haven't 100% met the standards by doing that, because the standards talk about jobs. They talk about paying taxes. I don't think most kids pay taxes on their...
I would bet.
When mom and dad gave me money, and my mother was a CPA, but that's one thing she didn't require me to do was pay tax. I had to pay interest, but I never paid taxes on it.
I've asked students regularly. In my American government classes, I have a section on economic policy and such, and we often talk about taxes. And that's one thing I always, now I'm sure all of you, when you were babysitting or mowing lawns, you all paid taxes on, and they look at me with blank stares or like, am I going to get in trouble for it? Yes.
Now, Amy can address some of the changes that have been made to help bring a little bit more structure to that.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like we have made some steps forward. There's still giant leaps that need to be made, but just in this last legislative session, there was a law that was passed that's pretty well known, but where there's now 4 years of required math, and there's several other things. And one of those courses can now be a personal finance class. Okay. So that won't go into effect for another year or two. So I'm really interested to see how schools respond to that and how that's going to change the options for personal finance. Because if that's offered as a year course, even if a student that may need higher levels of math for goals that they have in their future, that still it will be an option that maybe they could take that as an elective, or to still get those to still get that credit, but then also obviously serve the need for the standards to be implemented for that particular student. So there have been some steps that have been made forward, but the problem is it's just not enough to get everybody in a cohesive direction moving forward. And so that's what leaves those gaps, and then not the same time that needs to be required for the standards to really be implemented. So I really feel like it starts with hopefully getting that legislative update so that we are moving forward, because that is what will make the change. But then also just a grassroots effort. If it's, districts can buy on, and parents and administrators can buy on that this is important for our students, they can make that happen. And a great example is actually in Piedmont Public Schools. They got lots of feedback from their students that they wanted more, and so they now offer a semester course of the more basic personal finance class at the freshman year, I believe, and then the higher level of personal finance at the senior level. And that was a response of hearing what students wanted and then responding to that. Mm-hmm. So it can be done, and I think that's what we hear a lot. And going back to the why isn't it happening? It's we don't have the resources, the time to make this happen. And while we do recognize that's an issue, it can be done. We see it happening.
Well, okay. So even though we have certain financial literacy standards, very strong standards, as you have illuminated for us, it feels to me like the students, when they come to my classes, so I teach at a community college, so I get students all the time who tell me they were never taught anything about personal finance, and especially on taxes, because again, that's something that I cover. I walk them through sometimes, a scenario of trying to figure out how much to pay in taxes given this, this situation.
If you need a good lesson on that, you can go to the state curriculum and find that.
I might have to do that. We'll talk after the show here. But were they just not paying attention? Well, I realize that could be. I realize from my own experience that could be the case. Is it the fact that the way the material is being presented? Are the standards not enforced? And we kind of mentioned that, so we'll come back to that maybe. But I'm just trying to figure out what's the disconnect between what my students are telling me they didn't learn and what I'm hearing from you is what the requirements are.
Again, if you're taught that at the 9th grade level and you don't hear anything about it then for 4 to 5 years, and you have maybe one class period on it, you probably would say, oh, I don't know anything about this, never heard of it. And so I think a lot of it depends upon what year it's taught, because if it's taught in that junior, senior year, or if it's a second course, certainly there's going to be a lot of reinforcement for maybe what they learned in a basic course or for what they heard in a basic course. At the same time, if it's implemented in a way that just click through these slides or watch these videos and then you've passed your requirements, students aren't going to remember that because, again, there wasn't classroom discussion. There wasn't an active engagement, active involvement in the learning process. And so I think it's a whole variety of reasons that students would say, I never learned that. And I had students take my class and say, why didn't you teach that? And my comment was, well, maybe you weren't there that day. Or I did teach that, and let's go back and let's put it in this framework. And then sometimes they would go, oh, yeah, I kind of remember something about that. But learning is not just hearing things once. It's having that reinforced. And if it's not reinforced somewhere along the way, we really don't learn it. We hear it.
I think the other thing to go along with that, and of course, just that it depends on, where they did go to school, what kind of, and whether it's just kind of here, quick, do this and not get the quality education in personal finance. The other thing that we take very seriously at the council is effective financial education. So it's not just about, okay, we've addressed these standards. We want to make sure that there's active learning. We really look at game-based learning to where there's active engagement in what they're doing. And so we take that seriously. That's what when we're training our teachers and writing lessons and activities, that's what we focus on because we know that works. And so so when those types of methods are used, it's going to help more. But it's just it really depends on how it was delivered to them and helping them to understand how to go back. There's so much involved. I think there's 38 actual points. So there's 14 standards, but actually 38 actual finite points of those standards. And so it's also about teaching them how to go back and access information when they need to do their taxes. Where are good places to go to know what they're doing is right? I think that's an important part of it too.
And to kind of piggyback on that, having been in the classroom, James, you and I both know it's the quality of that person that is teaching that. And that's the value of the council. Because if a teacher comes in and they're hired and they just say, oh, you're going to teach personal finance, they may not have any time to prep. They may have never had a course in personal finance. They may have grown up in a home where personal finance was never discussed. And now that they're handed this, they're oftentimes not told there is a state curriculum. They're oftentimes not told here are the standards. They're out there on their own trying to figure it out. That's where the council really bridges that gap to make sure that what is happening, that teacher is prepared to walk into that classroom for whatever is happening and prepared to help those kids learn.
It sounds to me like part of that is making sure that those teachers know of those resources,
Exactly.
right? Yeah. I've often thought at the college level, every college has a core requirement of courses. Personal finance is not on that. It would seem to me that, and I know that you guys focus on K through 12, and I don't want to branch out there, but just me thinking through some things, it feels like of all the things you might want students who are heading out and actually going to be getting jobs in careers, students who are in many cases, I know at UCO, certainly at Rose, we have a lot of students who are already working and having to figure out how to manage money and do this kind of, seems to me like that would be a relevant core requirement.
Well, I will say this. There was a period of time where UCO did require personal finance. We had more students enrolled in personal finance at UCO than any other college or university in the United States.
Wow.
And when it was implemented in the high schools, then, or in 7 through 12, but when the personal finance legislation was passed, the university backed off on that a little bit. Now, whether good or bad, they backed off on it a little bit. And so now it's listed as one of the options of among 3 or 4 core courses.
Sure. Right.
It still has a significant enrollment, but it is not anything like what it used to be when every student had to have personal finance. And I credit Roger Webb with that because Roger really led the campaign for personal finance. I think you know a little bit about his wife and the quality of that she brings.
Who is retiring. We just had her big retirement celebration yesterday, as a matter of fact. And so a sad time for a lot of us at Rose State College to see someone who's been a wonderful college president. And I can only imagine the conversations between two college presidents, you know.
Absolutely. And 2 of my favorite people. I will have to say that.
Okay. Well, what are some, why is financial literacy needed? What are some of the problems that arise? And listen, I could answer this question from personal experience a little bit, but what do we get into when people don't understand the basics of financial literacy?
Well, at the point in time that we passed the legislation in Oklahoma, we were in the top 5 in bankruptcies in the United States, in this state. And that had everyone's attention. I don't know where we are today. I haven't kept up with that research. Amy may know a little bit more about that. But we are not a wealthy state.
Right.
And we are not a state even where the vast majority of our high school graduates go to college. We're still behind in a lot of that. And it's one of the things I love about being at a regional university in the community college system, because that brings in more students that would never have the opportunity to go. So I put a plug in for that. But because of those financial needs, and I've been reviewing scholarship applications at UCO for the last couple of weeks, and it doesn't take an Einstein to figure out the financial burdens that families are facing in this state. And if they're never taught, they never learn. And it doesn't pass by osmosis. It doesn't just take, parents saying, oh, you got to manage your money. Mm-hmm. It really is a learning process because the vast majority of parents really don't understand either. Or they're in such financial straits that they haven't made good financial decisions. And so you've got to break that at some point in time. You've got to break that stereotype, or you have that, I can't think of the word that I'm trying to come up with, but that pattern of behavior, I guess is what I'm really trying to say, and give kids a chance. And I think personal finance gives kids a chance to reach their goals, their personal goals. And I think, even if you grow up on the bad part of town, you still have personal goals. You want to get out of that trap. Right. And how do you get out of that trap? Education. And so this is just a critical part of that.
I think it goes beyond financial illiteracy isn't just a personal issue. It's a community issue, a workforce issue, an economic issue. So if we can make these changes now and really support our students in learning that, it's going to make a huge difference. And we know that we have data to prove that it'll change outcomes and it'll improve outcomes for our economy. So I think that's a really important point too.
I had an employer tell me a few years ago that for every 10 applicants that came in, they basically eliminated half of them just because. And then they eliminated another 3 of the 5 that were left because of their finances. Oh, wow. They didn't trust them to make good decisions, or they didn't trust them to handle money or even be stable enough to come to work on a regular basis. So not only are we limiting a person's ability to get a job, we're limiting business and industry. And if business and industry looks at this state and says, oh, look at the debt, look at the poor credit scores, look at all of these financial issues, they'll go someplace else where it's a better environment for their employees.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, I know sometimes, and I've been, a long time ago in this situation too, sometimes a person looks and they don't feel like they have enough money and it's like, well, I just need to earn more. And when you start really digging in, it's like what you're earning is sufficient. Your problem is on the other end of what's going out.
Well, if that were true, then wealthy people would never file bankruptcy.
Right.
And we still see families that have an admirable income that still are not financially healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you're exactly right there. It's just, it seems to me that so many problems arise. And I know when people talk about divorce rates, they say, money problems are a strong contributor to divorce. I've tried with our children, my wife and I have tried to kind of really help them understand once they have a job and once they're working, here's how to ensure that you don't get into some of the problems that we've seen other people get into, or that, that we got into ourselves early on in our marriage and whatnot. Here's how you can avoid those kind of traps. But I think something you said was, it can't just be you take this class one time and you've done it, right? It's got to be something that's reinforced. And I think a lot of times we don't do that, right? And then to me, I think I teach political science, and the main course that I teach is American government. But there's an element of personal finance that's related to government, right? And as we're seeing right now, we'll come back to that here in a minute, but we're seeing right now. So it seems like there can be ways of incorporating some of these things in things that you might not think of as being personal finance courses, but certainly could reinforce the foundational course that students have.
If I can just say a little personal story, not to get political or anything, but I'm not a fan of tariffs.
Right.
And that comes from my experience in economics and economic history. I don't care who it is. It's, set all that aside. I'm not a fan of tariffs, and I don't know an economist that is.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Trump was elected and his stance on tariffs, the first thing I did, I made an appointment with my financial advisor. Now, I'm smart enough to make a lot of my own decisions, but I'm more comfortable having a financial advisor guide me because that's what they do. They're a professional. And so I went in and I met with him and I said, I know what's going to happen to the market if we get this. If these tariffs come in, I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm retired. My 401k I'm dependent on that. Right. And I want to make sure I'm protected. We walked all the way through. He said, here's this, here's this, here's this. He said, you've set yourself up so that you probably have the best defense that is possible. So I'm not ready to, jump off of any buildings or anything like that because while I don't like looking at the market drop, I feel that I did the very best that I could to protect what I have. A person that has never taken a personal finance class, knows nothing about economics, they're not prepared. Mm-hmm. They could lose an extreme amount of money in this process, whether it's tariffs, whether it's something else. Right. Anything can happen when you don't understand. And that's one of the values of the stock market game that the council supports. It's one of the advantages of, again, talking about retirement planning in the classroom. It's one of the advantages of teaching basic economics because you develop a knowledge base to protect yourself and your own investment. And no one is going to take care of us.
Right. And I think, you think about, again, all of the people in your situation, Bo, who did not know what this impact is going to be and the situation that they're going to find themselves in.
And you get into most companies today. I'm lucky. I have teacher retirement. I have Social Security. Those are kind of built in.
Sure.
Not everybody even has that base. Most people are dependent upon a 401k or just Social Security because they were never taught how to prepare in any other way. And so an economic crisis occurs, and they're I don't want to say victims, but they're certainly impacted more so than somebody else. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Because people like me work your whole life to try to accumulate something,
Right.
and then you start seeing it fall apart. Right. And it's basically because they were never taught.
Right. I want to get back to no, that's okay. Because Emily wanted me to make sure I asked a question relating to tariffs and the stock market. So you're right in where we were going to go anyway. And I may come back with another one. But before we do that, I do want to get into like some of the resources that the council can provide to K through 12 teachers who are responsible for teaching financial literacy.
Yes. And I'll start with a stock market game. That's one of our cornerstone programs that we have. It's available for 4th through 12th grade students. And it's a real-time simulation of the stock market. And students are given $100,000 in fictitious dollars that they can trade with real-time stocks. And I love this game. I love seeing what comes out of it and the outcomes. I'm very excited to hear what students are going to learn this semester. The game this semester ends next Friday, and then we always have stock market game awards that the Federal Reserve hosts for us, and they do presentations of what they've learned, and it's always so interesting to hear. And every semester is different what they've taken out of it, what they've learned. But the bottom line, what they get out of it at the end of the day or at the end of the program is just that I can do this, or I didn't know anything about this. And one of my favorite stories about the stock market game was actually in 2021, and we had a top 10 team in the country for the stock market game. Wow. It was Muldrow High School, and they would typically get a trip to DC, and it was 21, and that wasn't happening, and it was very sad. So we called our good friend treasurer Randy McDaniel, and we said, "Can you do something for us?" And so he hosted the winning team at his office, and had a day with him and spoke with the students, and we had a lunch with him. And there was a point in time where these high school students were visiting with Treasurer McDaniel, and they were talking about stocks and all of these things, and there became a point where I did not know what they were talking about. They were above my head. And I loved it. I loved that they were having this really high-level conversation with the treasurer, high school students, and it was so. And they said before that they had no idea what they were doing. This was all new information, and so that is real. They're going to remember that forever. That's impactful learning that is not going to go away. And so that's what we're after, those kinds of things. And so that's one of the programs that we have that's available to everybody, and parents can play it at home with their students. They can make a small donation to just play if they want to do it at home. It's free for Oklahoma teachers, though. And so that's a great program. We'll start back up in the fall. We have a fall and spring game, and then a full year program as well. So that's one of the programs. Another program that we have is Smart Path Learning. That's for 1st through 8th grade, and that's a great program that can be done in the classroom, or parents can do it online at home. It's geared towards a classroom, but you could definitely do it with kids. It'd be a great thing to do this summer or something like that. But it's a interactive learning, and there's characters, and they're going through different scenarios. And I'll take that moment I've just explained to programs that start at earlier grades. And we talked a lot about high school and older grades, but we really believe that it's all the way through. And if we're talking about it all at every moment, that's what's really important.
Yeah, that's that reinforcement where students are learning.
Exactly.
Learning and applying what they're learning.
Yes. So we definitely believe that. And there are in the social studies standards, there are some personal finance, economic themes in the earlier grades, and there's economic things throughout the social studies standards. That's kind of a natural thing, but they're the enforcement, again, the implementation is sometimes where we're lacking. So those are two of our programs. We also have the Personal Finance Challenge and Invest in Girls is another program that we have for high school girls, and that's a great program that we have about helping girls to own their financial future and to also increase the pipeline of women working in the finance industry. We see stats that at about fifth grade, girls kind of check out sometimes with that they feel like they can do a finance related job, and so this is to help increase that pipeline of women working in finance. And then we also have the Me competition, which goes a little bit. Dr. Sasser and I were visiting about entrepreneurship before, and the Me competition is very entrepreneurship based, and that's a really big part of our economy. That's what drives our economy. But it teaches so much about personal finance, and it's such an important part of personal finance and economics. And so that's a big thing that we do. So those are just a few programs that we have. One other one that I wanted to note, our website is full of information, but a big popular program with our teachers is using children's literature to teach economics. And that's a great program that anybody could go to and find a great list of books that have a personal finance and economic things and themes. And then we have lessons to accompany that. So that's just a few of our programs. We have a lot, though, to meet all the needs that we have, and especially when our standards our implementation is weak and our standards in economics are lacking. That's what we do to respond, is any way we can weave economics into what we're doing. That's what we're trying to do.
And we're very fortunate, I still call myself we with the council, but very fortunate to be part of a national network that feeds in. And so there's resources that are available, across the spectrum with the National Council and the other states. And states are so wonderful. And it's one of the things I always loved about economic education and personal finance, because the people that are in it are so willing to share experiences. And none of these programs started here. They were programs that, you can take and adapt to fit Oklahoma. And so that makes it fun. And Amy, the year that the market crashed, 07, 08, we had a group of fifth graders that doubled their money.
Oh, wow.
And we had a stockbroker that came and spoke, and he told those fifth graders, he said, when you guys graduate from college, you have a job. Here's my card. He said, because you outdid everybody. And they talked about learning how to buy defensive stocks. And no one else in the room really knew what they were talking about. They thought they were talking about national defense. But no, they're talking about things like Walmart, that tend to do well when the economy doesn't do so well. But those kids doubled their money, and they were fifth graders.
Amazing. Well, it reminds me of that old saying, we learn by doing. Exactly. And I think the more that we can offer practical learning experiences for students, especially in areas like this, because I get it. It's like teaching government. Not every student's going to groove to this, but if you can give them some practical, hands-on opportunities to make it real to them, it can open up some eyes and worlds to them that they might not have had otherwise.
Stock Market Game also has a writing competition called Invest Right that goes along with it, and it's for junior high and high school. And those students can write an essay about what they learned. And I've judged those, I think, ever since the beginning of Invest Right. And it's really fun to go back and see what students have to say. Because, you see the value of what you're doing.
We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
Well, let me ask you, are there any upcoming events that you are either hosting or sponsoring that you'd like to share with people?
Yes, in June we have Bacon and Economics. So if you can think about economics, but with a side of bacon, that's a great way to start your day. And I have a feeling there might be some mention of tariffs. But we're very fortunate at UCO that we have a witty economist, which is sometimes a rare breed. And Dr. Travis Roach does that for us. And he's a great speaker, and it's kind of like a fun economics class with bacon. And so that'll be coming up in June. That'll be on our website. And anybody who's interested in just kind of asking questions questions and learning more about what's going on. He's also very real time. So he'll get up in the morning and watch the news and then talk about it. So he does a great job explaining economics. So that's one event that's coming up. And then if you're any teachers, we're gearing up for our summer programs, our summer professional development. Okay. So we'll have a lot going on this summer, and that's all disciplines. So we have a economics of science, charged up about economics is what we call that we partner with the Association of Electric Cooperatives and several others like that. So we reach all disciplines. That's one thing that I do love about economics. It's everywhere.
That's for sure. Right?
And then there's probably a personal finance luncheon in.
Yes. That is a great. So in August, which we have our biggest event of the year. It's called Back to School with Financial Literacy. And it seems like we're just finishing school, like thinking about back to school, but that's just in like 4 or 5 months.
Right,
oh my goodness. But that's a great event that we do. It does help raise funds too, so we can provide these programs. But it's a time to learn about what's going on it's kind of a state of the address of personal finance education. And we have lots of great speakers, and it's a great time to learn about what's going on, and it helps raise funds for our mission.
I want to come back to the tariff thing, because this is a politics and such show. And I don't want to get too deep into that, because I don't want it to color people. I think this information that you guys have provided has been fantastic. And I wish I had known about it and my school had been involved in something like this when I was going through high school and whatnot. And I still firmly believe, for any of those educators out there in higher education, this ought to be a part of the core requirement of higher education as well. But I was on social media this morning, and someone was posting, "Don't look at your 401k. Don't look at your 401k." But my thinking was, no, you should look at your 401k and make the connection between what certain policies will do and the kind of outcomes those policies can have. And I think a lot of people are getting a real-time lesson in how public policy can impact your personal financial situation right at this moment. And it's unfortunate that it is somewhat of a negative lesson, but it is one that I think people are going to be learning pretty quickly.
I will never forget, and I guess it was, I don't remember what the circumstance was, but my husband came in one day and he pulled out his 401k statement. He looked at his every month. I don't. I look at it, a couple of times a year, because I guess just my awareness, I kind of know what to expect, and I don't want to see such tragic news. But he came in and he said, "Am I reading this right? It says I put this money in and I got this money out. And the money I got out is negative, but I put positive in." And I said, "Yes, that's right. You're exactly right. But think about what is happening. Do you like to go into Walmart?" My husband was one that, when I die, bury me at Walmart, because then you'll come visit me. But I said, "Do you hunt for sales?" Mm-hmm. "Oh, yeah. I go in and he would. I mean, if something went on sale, he would hardly buy it." I said, "Okay, look at stocks that way, because when the market drops and you're continuing to put this money in, it's like you're buying those stocks on sale." Right. And I said, when the market recovers, because we know that it always does recover, always has recovered, right, that now we own more stock. And so that helps to offset. Now, when we were in our 40s and I was saying that was great, because we had 20, 30 more years before we had to worry about it. I'm not in my 40s anymore. And so for people that are older, I think it is even more advantageous to check those, right, and see what is going on. I'm not sure that this is now the time to make decisions, because you don't lose money in the market until you sell those stocks. Right. So sometimes we kind of need to weather that storm, but then go find you a financial advisor that you trust and has your best interest at heart, and make sure it doesn't happen to you again. Right. Yeah. But my advice would be, I just kind of sit back. Yes, be aware of what is happening. Notice that what happens in the world, not just locally, but what happens in the world affects everything that we have. And we are a worldwide economy. We are not I mean, that's just the way that we're set up.
Right.
And there's reasons for that. And there's good, solid economic reasons for that. And we as Americans, we as Oklahomans, we as whatever we are, we have to realize that we're part of this world economic system. And what happens one place impacts everything else. Right. And my fear is right now that we are going to be standing alone because we're alienating so many other economic systems that have helped support us. We've got debt running out the kazoo, but if it wasn't for that international investment, we wouldn't be able to pay that debt. Right. And so now we're putting ourselves even at jeopardy of being able to pay our debt because we owe money to them, right, not just to ourselves. Right. So it's, I could get on the soapbox, but I think your idea, James, of just being aware of how everything is so interrelated, right, is critically important. That no man, no woman, no country, no society in the world that we live in today isn't truly an island. Right. It all is somehow or another integrated, and I think we have to be respectful of that, whether we like it or not. That we have to be respectful and be aware of where we are.
Right. Right. Well, thank you both. Our guests today again have been Amy Lee, the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Council on Economic Education, and Dr. Lynn Sasser, Professor Emeritus at the University of Central Oklahoma in Economics. This has been a fantastic conversation. I have learned a great deal. I appreciate you two taking the time to visit with us. And we want to remind our listeners that democracy is not a spectator sport. We'll see you next time.
Hey everyone, this is Deborah, the resident Gen Z member of the Not My Generation podcast family. Not My Generation is produced in the Possibilities Inc. studio. This episode was produced by Santiago Ramones. It was edited by Santiago Ramones. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Send a voice memo to notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu and you could hear your voice on an upcoming episode. If you liked today's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with others. You can check out previous episodes on any podcast app and on our podcast website at notmygeneration.captivate.fm, where we also provide our show notes. And remember, you can follow Not My Generation on X, formerly known as Twitter, at NMG Podcast, and on Facebook at Not My Generation Podcast. We look forward to interacting with you soon.